All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us here on Twitter Spaces. I'm Melissa Dudon, a producer with the City of Las Vegas. Today, we're joined by a local Las Vegas expert to talk about how the future looks pertaining to water. So, why are we talking about water today? Well, on August 16th of this year, the federal government, prompted by the low water levels in Lake Mead, issued a water shortage declaration on the Colorado River. Now, the shortage will reduce the amount of water Southern Nevada will be allowed to withdraw from Lake Mead beginning in January 2022. Now, the good news is that thanks to the strong water conservation efforts Southern Nevada has achieved over the last 25 years, the shortage declaration will have little impact initially. Our area already uses less water than what the new allocation is going to be, even with the cut factored in. However, it has generated a lot of questions about how our future looks where water is concerned. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers today. We have a great panel for you. We are joined by Assemblyman Howard Watts, who represents District 15. He's also the chair on the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources and the vice chair on the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure. We are joined by Dr. Nicholas Irwin, who is the assistant professor of economics at UNLV Lee Business School. Bronson Mack, media relations and public outreach manager for the Southern Nevada Water Authority. And Marco Vallata, Senior Management Analyst with the City of Las Vegas. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Glad to be here. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so let's just go ahead and start with a pretty basic question, but it's the question that everyone's wondering. With the recent shortage declaration, what does this mean for water? Any one of you can answer this. Let me start with you, Assemblyman Watts.
Oh, thank you. And, the Water Authority, I think, can speak a little bit more in more detail about what it means for us. But I think looking at it big picture, we know that the Colorado River is in drought, and it has been for many years. And that's really what this declaration reflects, is that, we're seeing flows decline, and Lake Mead and the Colorado River are the main source of water for our community, as well as communities across the Southwest. And so that's why it's more important than ever that we double down and triple down on our efforts to conserve water in this community. I guess, I wouldn't want to make people think that we're going to be running out of water anytime soon. And the Water Authority has done a great job to make sure that that's not the case. But all of us need to do our part, here in Southern Nevada and across the region, to make sure that we're conserving this precious resource to sustain us, moving forward.
And Bronson, I'll go ahead and toss it over to you. Your thoughts on this very same question. What does this mean for water in our area?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Assemblyman Watts just conveyed there. The drought that we've been seeing and experiencing on the Colorado River for about the past 20 years, it is serious. I mean, we have seen the flows of the Colorado River reduced on average by about 20% year over year during that time period. That has had significant impact on the levels of Lake Mead. And Lake Mead's water level has dropped about 140 feet since the turn of the century. So while we have had those challenges and seen the impacts of the drought, our community has really become well prepared not only to address our current water needs, but also to continue managing our water responsibly. And we've really done that through our progressive and comprehensive water conservation programs. When the drought started in the 2000s, Southern Nevada was using more than its Colorado River allocation allowed. Now, there were some provisions on the river that allowed us to take more water, but we used about 325,000 acre feet, and our allocation is 300,000 acre feet. So the drought hits, and it was really important that our community did a pivot, a full 180, and focus on water efficiency. And we implemented the types of water conservation programs we know today: watering restrictions depending on the season, turf replacement program, water budgets for golf courses, car wash programs, and pool cover programs. So all of those efforts coalesced. And as we look back to where we were in 2002 to where we are today, our community is using 23% less Colorado River water, yet our community has grown by nearly 800,000 people during that time. So conservation remains our key focus, and it's very important that we have everybody in Southern Nevada contributing to that effort.
And Bronson, I kind of want to do a follow-up question with you on this, because those conservation numbers, those are amazing numbers and really shows the community's commitment to save water. But who are the biggest water users, would you say, in our communities in Southern Nevada?
That's a great question, Melissa. And if we were just to look at on a sector by sector basis, who uses the most water in Southern Nevada? It is residential. It is the multifamily and single family residential sector of our community that uses about 60% of all of the water that gets supplied throughout the valley. Now, as we look at that a little bit closer, in the residential sector, about 60% of the water we use in our homes is indoor water. That is water that we get to safely reclaim, treat to a very high standard, and safely return that water back to the surface of Lake Mead. And for every gallon that gets returned back to the surface of Lake Mead allows us to take another gallon out from deep within the lake through intake number 3 and bring that water into our drinking water treatment facilities and supply this valley with high quality, safe drinking water. About 40% of the water that gets supplied in the residential sector, that is water that ultimately gets used outdoors, and that is water that gets lost. That's the water we only get to use once. So we really focus our efforts on our outdoor water conservation because that's where we can actually see the largest savings.
Okay, that's great to know. So kind of going off of what you're saying, I want to turn the conversation to Dr. Irwin from UNLV. How has the pandemic actually impacted water use and water conservation efforts? I'm assuming more people are working from home, and that is probably what we're going to see going into the future is people working out of their homes.
No, that's very true. And this, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that a lot of us have been able to take advantage of remote work. But with that remote work and working from home more often, we are using more and more water in our homes. And obviously, thanks to the great work of folks at SNWA and our public officials, we know how to conserve, and we have a message of conservation. But as we start working more and more in our homes, or spending more time in our home, that water usage, is going to start to eat in, especially if we are recreating outdoors or we decided to perhaps take up gardening over the pandemic. As we're staying in our homes longer for more and more time during the day, we are going to be using more water, and that extra strain on our water, on our scarce water resources, it has to be accounted for in some way.
Absolutely. All right. Well, another question for the panel. The Colorado River Compact was adopted in 1922 and has since guided the water rights for the 7 states that take water from the Colorado River. So a question that we're seeing over and over again is, will it ever be amended? Can any of you give me an answer on that?
This is Assemblyman Watts. I'd be glad to jump in with an initial take on that. The compact is the foundation of what a lot of us call the law of the river, but that is a series of agreements that is more than any one thing, including the original compact itself. So over time, countless laws have been passed to address how the operation of the Colorado River works. And remember, not only does it flow through 7 states, it also flows into the nation of Mexico. So it also includes international treaties. The main portion of the compact is it allocated water out to the states based on kind of how they looked in the 1920s. And Nevada got by far the smallest share of Colorado River allocation because Las Vegas was very small at that time and wasn't projected to have the kind of growth that we have seen in the last 100 years. Do I think that compact itself and those initial allocations are going to be renegotiated? No, because at the end of the day, when those amounts were doled out, we gave out more water than flows on average in the Colorado River. So pretty much nobody has anywhere to go but down in the renegotiation. I guess, except with the exception of Nevada, there's not much less we could receive. But what I do think is that there's a lot of other avenues within the legal structure that governs the river for us to make adjustments. And so, I think the Water Authority can talk about the drought contingency plan, which is what triggered, the shortages that we're seeing, and that's aimed at preserving the water supply for all of us. I think we're going to be looking at renegotiating those agreements in the coming years, and I think we can do that in a way that manages the river based on the drought conditions we're seeing, based on the climate change that we're seeing, to make sure that it operates in a more sustainable way moving forward. And I think that's the best option compared with renegotiating the compact itself.
I really like that way to sort of sum up those issues. And you have to think of it as the economist here. What are the incentives for the other states who get a lot more water than us? What are their incentives to want to renegotiate? And in order to do that, we'd have to come together and reach some sort of grand bargain, and that's probably going to be a very difficult to do, especially as we're the lowest person with the lowest allocation. So California, who gets this giant allocation of the water, they really enjoy that water, and it's really tough to want to get them to give some of that up, even to help out everyone else.
Yeah, and this is Bronson from the Southern Nevada Water Authority. I think Assemblyman Watts provided a very good overview there. The Colorado River Compact in and of itself is an interstate compact between 7 states and the federal government. And there are provisions in the U.S. Constitution which outline how interstate compacts are created. So to open up the Colorado River Compact and go through some type of wholesale renegotiation would require the concurrence and approval of 7 state legislatures to agree upon it, 7 governors to agree upon it, as well as both houses of Congress, and then ultimately the president. So when we're talking about the renegotiation of the Colorado River Compact, it's really the type of issue that is likely to end up in decades of litigation. It would also require, as was indicated previously, that some states would get less so that Nevada could get more. And what's really more important is that the 7 states stay focused and maintain cooperative partnerships amongst the states to develop cooperative agreements that build flexibility into how the river is operated and how we can ultimately continue to share this water supply and this resource amongst the 40 million people that depend on it. So through these ongoing partnerships, we've been able to make smart investments. We've been able to make good policy in how the river is operated, and that's how we'll continue to be successful. And it's these types of negotiations and new agreements that outlined the shortage guidelines and the drought contingency plan that Assemblyman Watts referenced. It was agreement amongst the states that determined what the reductions would be to Arizona, Nevada, and California should Lake Mead fall to specific trigger elevations. And as was indicated at the start of this discussion in August, the federal government did declare the first water shortage. And so for Southern Nevada, our 300,000 acre feet that we have historically been allocated under the Colorado River Compact will be reduced down to 279,000 acre feet. Now, the good news is last year, water use was about 256,000 acre feet. So we are below that shortage allocation, but that is because this community has really put an effort into conservation. It's conservation that has prepared us to be able to address these shortage issues, and it'll continue to be a key focus for us going forward.
I think
this is Marco from the city, and one of the other important things about the compact that has to be considered is just how the water on the river is used itself. About 80% of that is used for agricultural purposes and 20% for municipal purposes. And for our 300,000 acre feet, almost all of that is used for municipal purposes. So when we look at the at the upper basin and the lower basin states, some of that conversation that has to happen going forward is how are we using that water? And yes, it's important that we're growing food for, all seasons of the year for the populations, in the Southwest, but it's important to also consider, like, what are things that can be done in the agricultural sector to make better use and be more efficient with the water that we do have, even though it is declining.
Marco, I'm glad you jumped in on the conversation because I actually wanted to ask you, from a city standpoint, what is the city of Las Vegas doing to help with these conservation efforts?
Yeah, so the city has been a vital partner in the water conservation effort, and we have been very supportive of SNWA's regional management efforts through the adoption of policies and drought restrictions and development standards. Ultimately, at our municipal facilities, we've been able to reduce our annual municipal water demand by about 2.2 billion gallons over the past decade. And that's been done through changing out non-functional turf at our parks, converting sports fields to artificial turf, and then using xeriscaping and native and drought tolerant plants and plant species. Those have all helped us reduce our overall water consumption at our facilities. Having green certified, LEED certified buildings, our fire stations, our municipal courthouse that just opened, our city hall, those are all water efficient buildings that have used innovative technologies to process water from our air conditioning system and use it to irrigate landscaping out front. And then maybe most importantly is we've deliberately aligned our 2050 master plan, which was just approved by our city council in July, with the SNWA's water resources plan and a drought plan. So ultimately, even though we're going to be adding 300,000 new residents over the next 30 years, our goals are set up so that we continue to conserve water and hopefully reduce our overall per person consumption per day from where it is right now, which is right about 110 gallons down to about 90 gallons per person per day in the next 30 years. And that's going to take a lot of those strategies and collaborations with entities like SNWA and the Water District to make that happen and really to help support the development community in buildings that are way more efficient for the future.
Marco, if I can just hop in here, I'm glad that you brought that up because there really has been a coordinated effort amongst the municipalities as well as the water providers here in our community. Back in 2004 was when all of the municipalities, all of the jurisdictions here in Southern Nevada all adopted development codes that prohibited the installation of grass in front yards, prohibited the installation of grass in new commercial development, restricted backyards of residential properties only to be 50% covered in grass. That has made a significant difference in how new development moves forward and the amount of water that is consumed or used by new homes and new businesses in our community. And that type of coordinated effort is the type of thing that is very beneficial to the community as a whole and to really managing our water resources.
Do we have any of our neighboring states looking to Nevada saying, what are you all doing? You all are doing something correct, obviously. So what can we do? How can we learn from you? Do you have any of that kind of outreach from our neighboring states?
We do. Bronson again here from the Southern Nevada Water Authority. We do have a lot of coordination and collaboration from neighboring states and neighboring cities. I think the one thing to keep in mind, however, is community by community, water conservation isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all. And it's really dependent on each community to determine the ways in which they value using water, the ways in which they can save water, and the types of coalitions that they can build within those communities to support water conservation efforts. For us here in Southern Nevada, grass becomes a big component of our water consumption. And other communities have valued grass, but find water savings in the agricultural sector, and we don't have an ag sector here in our community. So things like focusing on non-functional grass, which Assemblyman Watts was a huge supporter of in this last legislative session, and really worked hard with the Nevada legislature to move forward with AB 356. And I think I'll let him talk a little bit about that. But on top of that, one other key thing is that as we have looked at water use and that indoor-outdoor ratio that we have. And I had said earlier that we use 60% of our water supply indoors, and I got that backwards, y'all. I'll just correct that. We use 40% of our water supply indoors, 60% of our water supply outdoors. And that 60% is the water we only get to use once. Our Las Vegas hotels here in Southern Nevada use about 7% of our water supply. A vast majority of that is used indoors. So that is water that does get reclaimed and safely returned. So focusing on that outdoor water use, and especially with the removal of non-functional grass and the work that Assemblyman Watts did on AB 356 is really going to be key going forward for us.
Yeah, this is Assemblyman Watts. I'm glad to just add a little bit to that. So for folks who don't know, Assembly Bill 356 passed the legislature and was signed by the governor earlier this year. And it makes us, Southern Nevada particularly, the first community in the United States to implement any form of ban on non-functional turf. And what that means is, the parks and green spaces that we love and use to recreate, those are going to continue. But if somebody's only stepping foot on grass to mow it, and I think we've all seen some of those things in medians and other strips that aren't really being used, then it's time that we replace that with desert smart landscaping to preserve the water supply for our community. And since passing that, I've been reached out to by some communities in California who are interested in moving in that direction. There's a huge conversation going on in Utah over their turf plans, and I think that some of the things that we did have helped spur that. Southern Nevada has been a leader in water conservation, and that doesn't mean that there's not more that we can do. And I think this recently passed law is a great example of that. We've also collaborated on water projects in other states in order to help free up resources along the Colorado River. So I think those are just a few examples of the ways that we have influenced and inspired and collaborated with some of our neighbors in order to conserve water.
And this is Nick Irwin here at UNLV. And the wonderful work of Assemblyman Watts and our policy makers and the state, especially the folks at SNWA, has been their efforts have been studied by economists, and especially when it comes to water conservation. In fact, there's a recent publication in one of the top environmental economics journals that studies SNWA's Water Smart Landscapes program. And they found that program, with people adopt they remove their gash, it's the Cash for Grass program to sort of use the shorthand, that leads to a big decrease in that water usage. So that gets to the issue of these older houses that have grass. Removing that grass decreases that water usage, especially that outdoor water usage that we don't get back into the system. And that the program generated a pretty big net benefits. For every $1 spent on the program, from giving people the money to help support the conversion of their land and the administrative cost of doing it, it generates $3.54 of benefits to the homeowners from water savings and increases in their home values. So these efforts and these sort of policies are being studied by others and being noticed for how effective they are.
Dr. Irwin, that's a great point. As you look at the fact that Southern Nevada has been able to grow its economy over the past 2 decades, grow its economy in a way that continues to be water efficient, welcoming, nearly 800,000 new residents, while also reducing the amount of water that we're consuming. It is a very remarkable achievement that our community has made. Again, it's that focus on water conservation that has led us there.
So I think that is a concern for a lot of people, as you just mentioned. When you have the growth of Nevada and Southern Nevada, how do we still remain water efficient? So, Dr. Irwin, I'll let you keep speaking.
Oh, sure. I mean, these efforts like the SNWA, Water Smart Landscapes program, and generally letting the community know, especially the new residents that are moving into town, letting them know about our culture of conservation, how well we do with saving our water. To, as we welcome all the new residents because they enrich our economy and diversify our communities. But we really want to make sure that they know when they come in, they need to conserve water, especially if they're coming from places back east that don't deal with the same water scarcity issues that we have. Because we want to make sure there's not only enough water here for everyone now, but the future generations, and that water scarcity issues don't start to impact our economy in some way. And hopefully they won't, because we do such a great job with conservation.
Well, before we wrap up here, I just want to ask, we've been talking about residents conserving water and all the great programs out there, but are there any opportunities that any of our speakers see for water conservation in Southern Nevada?
Bronson again, checking in with SNWA. Again, it's really focusing on that outdoor water use. We have community-wide watering restrictions that require everybody to go out there and change their sprinkler clock 4 times a year with each of the seasons. And if we could get every property in Southern Nevada to change that sprinkler clock diligently 4 times a year and follow those watering restrictions, our community would continue to reduce its water use, and we would save enough water to actually make up for the reductions that we're seeing under a shortage condition next year on the Colorado River. So on top of that, you can save significant money on your water bill. Here we are now at the end of August. Tomorrow is September 1st. That is the first day of the fall watering restrictions. So we need everybody to go out to that sprinkler clock, change that sprinkler clock to your 3 assigned watering days. If you don't know what those watering days are, you can go to snwa.com, put in your address. We'll tell you exactly what your 3 watering days are. Those who don't change that sprinkler clock run the risk of getting a water waste violation and potentially a fine from their water provider. So following the seasonal watering restrictions diligently, community-wide, would have huge impact for us, as well as removing that non-functional turf. Grass that's in your front yard, grass that's in the commercial developments, which will be addressed under AB 356. All of that reduces our consumption of Colorado River water. It doesn't affect our quality of life. In fact, it gives us the opportunity to plant trees. We need more trees in this community, expand that tree canopy, expand the shade that's available to us, plant those flowering plants to support the bees and the hummingbirds and the pollinators. That is a benefit to the community, more so than continuing to hold on to that water-thirsty grass.
Yeah, and this is Assemblyman Watts. I would just echo that. I think the main call that we can make to the community is to take a hard look at grass and determine if you are not using it, then it's time to look at transitioning that. And AB 356, it addresses non-residential, so that's where we're looking to replace that turf within the next 5 years. But I think, I strongly encourage any homeowner to look at the grass that they have and consider using SNWA's rebate program to replace that with Desert Smart landscaping. And then just reiterate the point that we do have issues with urban heat. The city of Las Vegas actually has a great plan in its master plan to address that by planting trees. And that's what we need, not grass, but trees. To provide shade and address heat in our community. And we can plant trees that are very drought tolerant and water smart. So encourage folks to look at whatever they can do in their homes or in their HOAs and their communities to remove grass that's not being used and replace that with Desert Smart landscaping, including Desert Smart trees.
Yeah, it's important for us to all remember that we all play a role in this here in Southern Nevada. So I want to thanks you, all of our speakers, for joining us today. Now, for any listeners out there, if you have any questions or you'd like to have some questions answered, just go ahead and DM any of the speakers or follow them on Twitter to get more information. Same with the city of Las Vegas. And that is going to wrap up our discussion about the future of water in Southern Nevada. For more information and tips, you can always head to snwa.com. All right, I want to thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time.